G'day everyone, I'm the Anti-Theocrat back with another one. Now, I worry about experts when a layman like me can come along and pick all the holes out of your documentation. But I am a layman who goes around picking holes out of experts' documentation. Doesn't that worry any of the experts who spent their long hours at university learning shit and then they read all their industry manuals or whatever in the fuck else it is, in this case all the legal books they have to read and keep up with? Does it worry them that a layman like me can come and poke all the fucking holes I like in it? Does it ever bother them that they should be doing their job better? So what are we looking at? The Judicial College of Victoria in Australia. They are apparently the trusted place where the judiciary come to share knowledge, wisdom and expertise. And I would say from what we're about to look at that the judiciary has no knowledge, wisdom or expertise if they let this stuff slide. That these are the people who judge, who rule over us, who judge us for our crimes and misdemeanours. And they are a right fuck up, I tell you. I'm skipping straight to one particular book. It was the one I first came across. So we're looking at the Family Violence Bench Book, published in Melbourne by the Judicial College of Victoria in William Street in Victoria. Now, I know we're supposed to say don't go and bother individuals, please don't go and pick on them and shit. But this is not only an organisation, it is one that chooses to tell our legal system what it should be doing. So go and give them fucking shit. Hang it on them hard. No individuals to troll on this one. This is fucking putting supposed experts right. Okay. So I'm going to jump to the first part, which is the descriptions, and I'm going to miss a lot of parts. I've just selected parts that are relevant to what I was looking for. There's a lot of just definition and stuff in here which none of us would find excessively interesting. 1.1, Family Violence. In the second reading speech of the Family Violence Protection Bill 2008, the Attorney-General emphasised the broad definition of family violence is intended to cover the full range of behaviours that can be involved in family violence and to provide examples to aid interpretation. It will mean the dynamic and patterns of family violence will be better recognised by the justice system to lead to better protection. That's something we could all hope for, isn't it? That we better define family violence and better recognise it. So let's move on, shall we, and find out how we're better defining and better recognising it. Definition of family violence and safety. Family violence is broadly defined to cover physical and sexual abuse, economic abuse, economic or psychological abuse, threatening or coercive behaviour, behaviour that in any way controls or dominates a family member and causes them to feel for their safety or well-being or for that of another person. The only word defined here is safety. Causing a child to hear, witness or be exposed to family violence. Safety means safety from family violence throughout this document. Section 5 further expands on the sorts of behaviour that are included in the definition of family violence. The following expand but do not limit the definition. But do not limit the definition, right? Assaulting or causing personal injury to a family member or threatening to do so. Now, the statistics for deaths by family violence are pretty much on a par, men and women, really. It's always higher for men committing crimes of violence, but when you look at the death statistics for last year, it's not all that different. My last video, I actually had that graphic up for, I think it was the November or December figures from Australian domestic violence. Anyway, they keep a fairly strict record, keeping to the methodology used by feminists, and why the feminists don't come up with the same numbers is anyone's guess. Maybe they're not trying hard enough, but anyway. Anyone can cause this in my books, and I think that we under assess how much women do it, because I won't go into, because I will just read this document. How about I just do that? Because this document will explain why. Because sexually assaulting a family member or engaging in another form of sexually coercive behaviour or threatening to engage in such behaviour. So if your missus threatened to take away sex, or she wasn't giving you sex in order to coerce you to do something, this would be covered here. Intentionally damaging a family member's property or threatening to do so. So when she starts picking things up and throwing them at you, the thing that she throws, if it's damaged or if it hits something else and damages it, then it could be said that she was intentionally damaging a family member's property. And the reason I have selected to focus on the fact that women commit these crimes is because we never hear that, do we? It's not just that we never hear that, but I think that men definitely underreport these things happening. I certainly never reported the events that happened to me in my life. Unlawfully depriving a family member of the family member's liberty or threatening to do so. Now, would liberty include liberty to see children? Is it the right of a parent to see their children? If there's no criminal reason, no criminal case saying why one parent could not see a child, would it be the liberty of a family member to see a child, or a grandparent, or anyone else? Would going against a court order to allow someone to see a child, even for limited periods, be considered under this as family violence? I'm saying to you guys out there whose missuses turn around and say, you can't have your child, I've decided that we're doing something else, that maybe you need to be reporting this as family violence. Because you can only bring more light to these sorts of legal documents that these things happen to men. And the worst that happens is you get arrested for false reporting or some shit, and that's likely to happen to you anyway. So fucking dig down, go hard. I don't know. I'm not in this position. I don't have that to risk. But if you are in this position and this is really causing you problems, report it to the police. See what happens. Just test the system. See what happens. Because it's written here. This is family violence. And I think it would be worth testing, if you were in a position to do so, whether or not the family court is a member of your family, or acting as a member of your family by making decisions for your family. Are they involving themselves as a member of your family? And are they depriving you of your liberty? I think there's some really testable things in this document. Causing or threatening to cause death of or injury to an animal, whether or not the animal belongs to the family member to whom the behaviour is directed, so as to control, dominate, or coerce the family member. And again, I've known women to not only hurt a pet, but to threaten to hurt a pet in order to get her way. I'm pointing out that women do these things because reasons that will become evident. Behaviour does not need to constitute a criminal offence to come to the scope of family violence. So, if it's not a criminal offence, how can it? This essentially says we can arrest you for non-criminal offences. Why wouldn't you just make these things criminal offences? But no, what you're saying is anything that we consider bad but not criminal can come under the scope of family violence. This is dangerous. This is akin to the courts, the legal system in the UK, or the police in the UK, I think it was, saying there are non-criminal hate acts. We've got a non-criminal family violence acts. That act clearly articulates that the scope of the family violence is much broader than that of the old act. Oh, yeah, if it's including non-criminal offences, good-o. It's broad, all right. Anyway, the Justice Legislation Amendment also included additional examples of behaviour that may constitute family violence, including using coercion, threats, physical abuse, or emotional or psychological abuse to attempt to cause a person to enter into a marriage, and all of that again to demand or receive a dowry before marriage. Well, I'm not big on dowry. I'm not big on the whole concept. I am married to a Chinese national, and dowry does exist in their system to some degree in some places, but didn't apply to me in any way, shape, or form. And I preferred not to marry, and was not in a position to be forced to. But I understand that places like India this is common, and I imagine that there are probably examples of that having happened here through certain cultural groups. As to being having any of this happen to force someone into marriage, hey, the old shotgun weddings, aren't they just, aren't they just a joke? Apparently not. Apparently this is a criminal thing under the Family Violence Act. Conduct, which is hang on, I'm going to skip ahead because a lot of this is just definition, and I don't want to get into that. So threatening, causing a child, use of examples. What I did find when I was digging through this, right, we get to this lovely chart. Additional guidance, common risk assessment framework. This is stuff they've tossed in to give you some extra stuff to think about. Preventing of studying or advancing self-skills. Public humiliation. Okay, these are... public humiliation? Geez, that's a fucking broad thing. Geez, what are you doing? Marching the person down the street naked? That would be pretty bad. But if you're just yelling at each other in public... fuck it, people do that. Preventing contact with friends. None of this... I mean, I've got questions, but none of it was as bad as when we got to the bottom and found systemic. Now, systemic puts me in the mind that this is a social justice clause. It has nothing to do with reality. So what we get is myths and stereotypes about people. And then we have a very selected social justice orientated group mentioned: Indigenous, gay and lesbian people with disabilities. Why didn't we say white people, or, I mean, we're all judged. Why did we need an IE and an IE that selected only these people? Because we're talking about systemic, and that's social justice, and social injustices only happen to these sorts of people. I'm surprised they didn't put women in there, just because. Prevent people from obtaining their basic rights. Look, when you say systemic, you're already saying this is not in the family. This is outside the family, and it has nothing to do with this. It should not exist in this thing here. But I make racial jokes about my wife being Chinese national. I call her a communist spy quite often. And in turn, she refers to me as those people, or, a million other things she does that, essentially racially aimed at me and the rest of the family. So I don't have any issue with the. You can fuck around with race things all you like without it being abusive. But we are really talking about the system having these wonderful things. So, look, read it for yourself. This just does not fit in at all. This should not be in this document. It needs removing, full stop. It just needs to be pulled out, because if any of this didn't fit in one of these categories, right, we're talking about sexualities and religions and ethnicities. We couldn't fit that in social, sexual, or spiritual. Really? It didn't fit in those sections? This is just social justice added to the legal system. It's fucking useless to anyone. And, as I've said, should already have been defined in these. In all of this, it should already have been defined in here. Moving on now, let's move to the next page. We jumped ahead to 524. We're just missing a whole heap of definitions and offences and so forth. Prevalence of family violence. And this is where we learn of the bias without any fucking efforts to hide it at all. The following sections consider the prevalence of family violence drawn from population surveys, police and court statistics, homicide data, all of which can be wrong. We know population surveys have been fudged many a times, and I can tell you now that the population surveys they are going to cite are definitely fudged, and fudged with a bias. There's no way they weren't, from the information that has been taken from them. Police and court statistics, and we know that the police and the courts will avoid calling some things domestic violence, especially crimes by women against men, or even women against children sometimes, and they will go to great lengths to avoid calling them domestic violence. It is, we're talking about systemic things, it is almost a systemic thing to not admit that women commit domestic violence. That makes any figures you get from police and court statistics questionable, just because the definitions are wrong, right? If a woman murders a man, it gets described as a homicide. If a man kills a woman in a domestic situation, it is called domestic violence and homicide. Domestic violence homicide. And that change in the way it is defined or reported makes these statistics meaningless. Homicide data, same problem. Exactly the same problem. If you do not note the situation in which a woman is killed is a domestic one, or you do, and you don't do the same when it's a man, then your homicide data is meaningless. And it is one of the problems that we face with these sorts of data, and we know we face that with this sort of data. When contemplating the prevalence of family violence, it should be remembered that most incidents of family violence go unreported. Most incidents. Where do you get this information? Why is this here? This is a guess. You have no facts, no figures, no nothing. Because these were unreported incidents. You have no evidence that I was abused by women in my younger years because I never reported it. Now, if I was to report it in a survey or on social media, as I have done before, I've told people of my story and why I didn't report things, and why, as an example of why men don't report things. It is all hearsay if it is unreported and not recorded. This is hearsay. This is how our courts are being advised to view this situation. And the reason for this is because what you do is you say women are the main victims of this. And most of it goes unreported. And what do you think the courts do in reaction to that? That's right, they come down harsher on the people they do actually have sitting in front of them. They treat them harsher as an example to the people who didn't get reported, supposedly didn't get reported. That's why you write this narrative in. It has no place in reality. It has no place in this document except to tarnish. That's it. It is there to tarnish. Reasons for the relatively low levels of police reporting in family violence incidents are discussed below. Underreporting of family violence incidents. I probably won't go there because I know where they get this information, and that will come up very soon. Population surveys. The 2004 International Violence Against Women survey included Australia. That's the population survey. The 2004 International Violence Against Women survey. This was a UN survey that the UN deliberately corrupted to be about women because the only people represented in the UN by their own gender club are women. Things like he, for, she, and UN women exist, but there are no UN men, UN boys, UN queers, gays, or lesbians. There is only UN women. And UN Women did this survey to find out about women. But that's where this information is taken from. It surveyed women aged between 18 and 69 about their experiences of physical and sexual violence. Did it ask me? I'm not a woman. It didn't ask me, but I damn well have my opinions and my experiences of it. Why didn't you ask me? Because their population surveys are all fucking biased. This is not the only one. I'll find you the other one as well. They used two studies very openly that were just about women. They did down here use the Australian Bureau of Statistics Personal Safety Survey, but again, this is a population survey, and it really was a little bit dicky. Anyway, I'm not going to read you all the statistics. I'll link below for the documents. You can look them up yourselves. But I find some of this quite questionable, and far more questionable when we keep getting told that there's underreporting and so forth. These statistics here, I call bullshit on in the first place. I just call bullshit on those because this is from the Australian Institute of Criminology's Women's Experiences of Male Violence study. So already we know where our bias lays, and this is a population survey, so it was asking people their personal feelings about things, which, as we know with such studies, can choose its own definitions for violence or what it considers violent acts. No time for it at all. No time for most of this, just because of where they got their information. homicide data, we know that underreporting a family. Where did they get this information? We'll just check, shall we? The Australian Bureau of Statistics Women's Safety Australia survey. So again, we have a bias by people who may have reasons for saying they had been abused, or it might have been fudged a bit. But in any case, we only bothered to ask women. Yeah, this whole section can get fucked. In fact, the whole Victorian violence bench book can get fucked at this point. But let's keep going, shall we? I'm going to find a new page, because we know that when they talk about the prevalence of family violence, so far they've lined it up as a women's issue. Entirely as a women's issue. 521. What is family violence? Didn't we do this? Well, we more or less did this. I'm going to call this one a quits. Definition of broader adoption. No, I'm going to leave that one, because I'm not going to sit here arming and ahhing at you for things that we've already pretty much done. Impact of domestic violence. 526. The effect of family violence on individuals include physical, mental, psychological, and economic harms. The following section considers the impacts of family violence on particular groups. So, shall we find out which particular groups? Impact on women. Top centre place. Research from Victoria shows that family violence research, the Vic Health 2004, the health costs of violence, measuring the burden of disease caused by intimate partner violence in Melbourne. I would love to know where that study is and what it's about, but I'm going to read you what they've ascertained from that study and put here as their guidance. Research from Victoria shows the family violence is a leading cause of death. That's an outright lie. Disability and illness in Victorian women aged 15 to 44, outranking obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure. Why they singled out obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure, I don't know, because death by domestic violence doesn't even fall in the top 20 reasons, causes of death in the country. For women or men, doesn't matter. This is an outright lie. Hello, legal experts, family violence bench book, anyone who's using it, you need to fucking sort this shit out. Direct efforts of family violence on women can include... I'm going to reread this for you. Direct effects of family violence on men can include physical injuries, disabilities, miscarriage, sexually transmitted diseases, and homicide. And yes, I included miscarriage deliberately because a man is part of a pregnancy. A man can be emotionally and psychologically abused by a partner who deliberately miscarriages or legally terminates a pregnancy just to have a go at him, just to dig at him for any fucking reason. Miscarriage can be an abuse against men. So I deliberately left that in when I read that. Less direct physical outcomes include headaches, irritable bowel syndrome, and self-harming behaviour, such as substance abuse or unprotected sex. Unprotected sex, definitely something that happens to men. Substance abuse, I wonder why men drink. Seriously, I have no doubt that if you regender this with men here, this applies to men too. The mental health effects of family violence include loss of self-esteem and decision-making ability. Yeah, ever been nagged by a woman to the point where you just give up? I know a lot of men who've been there. I've been there. Depression. Yup. Anxiety, phobias, and self-harm. Again, we take this, we change it to men. We ditch this idea that it's based on a study of women only. We change this to men, and it works. It's exactly the same fucking shit. Family violence can also lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, with sufferers experiencing nightmares, sleep disorders, intrusive thoughts, emotional detachment, and anxiety. The impact of family violence on mental health, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder, can interfere with an affected family member's ability to give evidence in family violence proceedings. So now we can invent the evidence we want if we assume that the person who's meant to be giving evidence is somehow being coerced. A woman, because this is about women, remember, a woman in court can't say exactly what she means, so we can infer what she means. That's fine. Mothers who are victims of fathers, hang on, we'll go back. Fathers who are victims of family violence may be affected in ways that interfere with their ability to provide for their children, their own children's needs. Do you see that still works? Family violence can undermine the emotional attachment between father and child, as it often does. More directly, prevent the father from caring for his child, as it often does. This didn't need to be impact on women. This works perfectly well as impact on adult human beings. And the only reason I say adult is because the next one is children. The one after that is community, which children present in family violence incidents study for the children. So, okay, fair enough. That seems to have targeted the right people. But impact on community. The cost of violence against women and children study. The cost of violence against women and children. We're talking about community. Do you know how many guys don't go and play sport on the weekend because their partner won't fucking allow it, or she doesn't want him out of the house, or whatever the fuck else coercive is going on? But again, you've put this all in the fucking pockets of women. In 2003-2004, approximately 1/3 of clients assessing services for homelessness were women escaping from family violence. And where do you think the fucking men are? Because men are more often homeless. And I would place any fucking money on the fact that a lot of that is men escaping family violence. But you didn't bother to make this about men at all, did you? Everything in the apparently communities are just fucking women and children. Not one fucking word of honesty in that. Moving on. 5.3.3. I'm surprised this one exists, which is why I have included this one. Children and young people can perpetrate family violence. Children abusing parents, sibling abuse, and family violence between adolescents are all emerging areas of law and social science. There is currently little research on the prevalence of this behaviour and the particular challenges it poses. So they're looking at how to stop brothers and sisters fighting, and they're going to call it family abuse, and they're going to take them to the courts and deal with them in the courts. Is that what they're saying there? Fucking great. My younger brother and I would have been in the courts all the bloody time. But anyway, this is interesting that children and young people can perpetrate family violence. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was looking up violence against men in the New South Wales Health website. Now, if you go there today, you will find very little information given, almost nothing. The page is almost blank. It suggests some services you can use, and most of the services are shit, so don't go near those. Most of the services will tell you what you've done wrong, why you're to blame. It's a lovely victim blaming that we're not allowed to do to women, but they will do it to men in family violence all the time. In any case, violence against 4 or 5 years ago, before the page became blank, it actually stipulated that partners, in-laws, extended family, and children could be perpetrated, and listed the methods by which they could perpetrate against men. About 6 months after I found that, and I'm pretty sure I screen captured it somewhere, but I cannot find it. But about 6 months after that reading, I went looking for it again because I wanted to reference it. And the page had been wiped clean. There was no reference to who could abuse men or how or why they might do it. It was just bare bones nothing. The women's page had got more intensive about describing it. That's New South Wales Health. So coming to Victoria, a more progressive state than New South Wales, I find it very difficult to believe that they actually admitted that children are perpetrators of violence. They didn't say against who, they just said vaguely, they can abuse parents and siblings and stuff. With a suggestion that they're going to start arresting brothers and sisters who fight. I can't wait for that day. Okay, so we get to the important stuff. Men. Content contained in this section was prepared by the Male Family Violence Prevention Association. They are known as No to Violence. No to Violence is a feminist organisation which only looks at male perpetration against women. Only. That is their only focus. They got their information from this section from a feminist, man-hating organisation. Right up the top, there it is. And it was gotten specifically for inclusion in this bench book. NTV is the peak Victorian body of organisations and individuals working with men to end their violence against family members. As I said, they are a feminist organisation with a bias in one direction only. And that's where the information from this section came along. So, what do we have? 541, men's use of violence towards family members. Right off the bat, we start off with men are to blame. Men do this. Men are never the victims. Men's behaviour change programs, the preferred approach. This is the feminist preferred approach that tells men they are broken, there is something wrong with them, and they need feminizing, which is called fixing in their words. Men's behaviour changing programs are well known for getting men to sign contracts that say, I caused the problems in my life. This is victim blaming. If you did the same to a woman, it would be called victim blaming. Now, when you have a male victim in Victoria, this is where they will generally be sent to a men's behaviour change program, even the victims. And they will be told to sign a document that admits to their being the perpetrators. This is the Family Violence Bench Book by the Judicial College of Victoria. it asked a man-hating feminist organisation to spell out how to deal with men. Unhelpful and unsafe approaches to men's use of family violence. Judicial responses. We've totally 4 sections, and not one of them admitted that men could be a victim. Now, this is about victims. This document from word go was about dealing with victims. And what we get is men, and the first 4 sections say they perpetrate. Responding to men who claim to be victims of family violence. Now, we're going to look at that one, I'll tell you, because that's a fucking nasty piece of shit. Responding to men in same-sex relationships. In one of the documents, it might be the next one. I'll leave it, and I might get into it later, or I'll deal with it in a separate video. But let's, I don't have this open, so let's see what responding to victims, 545. While women can be victims of family violence, women are more likely to be harmed by a stranger than by a family member. Quantitative research clearly indicates that the majority of incidents are perpetrated by women against men and their children. Sorry, I just had to read it that way. I will go back and read it properly. While men can be victims of family violence, men are more likely to be harmed by a stranger than by a family member. Okay, so the first thing we do is say, fuck you, you're a lying piece of shit. Do not come to us and complain. The first thing we've done is say, you are not important. This doesn't happen to you. Did we say this to women? Because we fucking should have said it to women. We should have even said other things to women. Had this been the level of bloody that we treat victims by, if this is how we treat victims, there's a whole fucking swathe of things we could have said to women. Quantitative research clearly indicates that the majority of incidents are perpetrated by men against women and their children. That's nigh on a fucking lie if we include all of the definitions and the fact that men just don't see themselves in that position. We really have to start using these laws for our own benefit, men. We really have to start reporting our partners as abusers. We've got to. We've got to. Because we have to test this. Because apparently we can't be victims. The Judicial College of Victoria asked the feminists, and the feminists said we can't be victims. The following sections look at things judicial officers should bear in mind, and some of the questions they can ask when ascertaining a situation in which a man claims to be a victim of family violence. In which a man claims. Not once in this document has it said women claim to be victims of family violence. We got these women's surveys to survey women, and women claim to be victims. I never said that. Not once. Not fucking once. This is just the opening statement on men. Men who claim to be victims. Incidents of abuse towards men. Research and evidence and experience of family violence professionals ambiguously demonstrates that relatively few men in heterosexual relationships are solely victims of intimate. This means you sign the fucking contract to say you caused it. I would like to point out that heterosexual relations are solely victims of intimate family partner violence goes for women too. We know the majority of family violence incidents go both ways. The majority. Women are co-conspirators. This is fact. The majority of women who use some form of violence toward their partner has been subjected to worse violence by that man before. So this is, it's your fault because you wouldn't stay at home. You wanted to watch the footy at the pub with your mates. And so you were worse than she was when she hit you with the fucking frying pan? This is fucking victim blaming. Men who are genuinely victims of family... Oh, there can be men who are genuine victims of family violence, experience of violence from a same-sex partner. Bullshit. Absolute fucking bullshit. A carer or male relative. Bullshit. Absolute fucking bullshit. The safest relationships statistically to be in are homosexual male. The least safe are homosexual female. Get it? Same-sex partners is an outright fucking lie. Now, I'm a straight man, and I will defend same-sex men in their relationships to the fucking hilt on this one. You're a fucking lying piece of shit. A carer. Who do you think the fucking carer is in most cases? It's his wife, right? Or a male relative. My ass, you have no proof of that. No fucking proof of that at all. And I would say when you go back to the definitions that we looked at earlier, wherever the fuck they were, I'm not going back to them, but when you look at the definitions, do you think nagging wife jokes for the last fucking 300 years were there just because, you know, wives are so perfectly fucking excellent people? Do you think the jokes about women chasing their husbands with fry pans, the women throwing things at their husbands, the nagging wife jokes, do you think all of these things just came out of nowhere? Do you? Get fucked. Victim blaming cunts you are. I have been the victim of domestic abuse twice, and I can tell you I did nothing. The first one was a girlfriend who wanted me to be more violent in bed and tried to get me into a brawl at the pub. She used another man as her weapon, but she was the instigator of the violence. The second was a flatmate who again tried to use a man as a weapon against me. Neither of these worked, by the way, but they tried to use a man against me. And the second one was because I wouldn't fucking sleep with her at all. Now, where was my blame in that? How was I worse than these two women? One of them I wouldn't be violent enough with, and the other I wouldn't sleep with at all. Yet they both tried to get my brains beaten in. One of them, the second one, the flatmate, vandalised my 1952 Morris Minor, to the point where I eventually had to give it away because I couldn't afford to do the work on it. That is covered under the terms of this abuse document. It was domestic, it was in my home, by someone I lived with. But no, we're always worse. And it's always men who do it to us. Take a flying fucking leap off something very fucking big, won't you? Land on your fucking head. It might do it some good. Right. Men who are the principal users of family violence. Again, we're back to men use family violence. So I'm going to avoid the rest of that because it's... Oh, hang on. We'll read the tagline, shall we? It's important to remember that people experiencing fear of terror will sometimes make bad decisions, which might add to their portrayal as being hysterical or out of control. All right, this is referring to men, so here we go. Women, if they feel safe enough, may undertake small acts of retaliation, which can be construed as evidence of a pattern of violence on their part. So all women can do is small acts of fucking retaliation. We've just spent the first part of male victims blaming men, and then we're just writing off, oh, women only do little things. They never fucking hit him with a fry pan. They never stab him with a knife. Establishing whether a man is a victim. There are a number of questions a judicial officer can consider asking when a man presents as an affected family member, even in a police application, including: have you ever been violent towards your partner? Victim blaming. Were you at fault? Victim blaming. Are you afraid of her? Oh, we finally get to a question about, you're a victim. Are you scared of her? But if a man does not feel significant levels of fear, then this raises the question about his victim status. Does it do the same for fucking women? If she's not suitably scared, does it bring questions about her victim status? Describe exactly what she did to you. Well, that should be part of the process anyway. But this is a part of the process they would want removed from women. They would want no responsibility for women to explain what was done to them, because that'd make it worse for them. It'd hurt them emotionally to have to just go through it all again and describe it. No problem with telling men to do it. I think everyone should do it. Describe. Oh, and by the way, there was a Dutch study that showed the victims are more likely to describe in detail. If you're not a victim, then you are probably less likely to describe. So allowing women to go without describing the crime against them is allowing people to make false accusations. Describe the frequency and any other patterns of violence. Yeah, fair enough. That should be part of describing what was done. What has held you back from seeking help earlier? Again, I think you could ask that of anyone, but let's see where this goes. They might have felt trapped. No, they might also feel ashamed or for not having sought help earlier. No, they might just feel ashamed for why they're not seeking help in the first place. Really, seriously. Unlike women, men do get ashamed of being beaten up by people. Women just see themselves as victims. Men see shame. No, it's not just whether their wife beat them up or not. If they got beaten up at the pub, there's an element of shame in it. Right? Fucking hell. In addition to responses to the above questions, judicial officer may also wish to consider the following questions and issues. Has the man had any history of criminal behaviour? Are we allowed to ask this of women? No, we are fucking not. We're barely allowed to look at their phone histories or anything. We are. But apparently this is okay. You can do this to men. If you can do this to men, you can do this to women. Do you have any other criminal history that we should know of? By the way, unless it's relevant, I don't think the courts are meant to do that. And if you are saying he's a victim and she's the perpetrator, then his criminal history should not be relevant. Has the man had any intervention orders taken out against him in the past? Why does that matter? Has the wife had any intervention orders taken out against her in the past? Would you be allowed to ask that? It doesn't matter if he has had intervention orders taken out against him in the past if she is currently the perpetrator. Is there evidence of a man using controlling attitudes? Right, victim blaming. If the accused woman has attended court, has she ever felt the need to apply for an intervention order? Again, not relevant. If she's the one currently standing in front of the court, his actions are not relevant. Only hers. It's victim blaming again. Does the woman say that she was defending herself? And again, with the trying to make out that women only retaliate, small acts of retaliation. She didn't really mean it. Aw, she was just defending herself. Aw. And all of this is about, is he an aggressive man and was she defending herself? That whole fucking section there is about trying to blame him. Remember? The people behind this information about men, remember who they are? They're a feminist group, a man-hating feminist group, which specialises in male behaviour changing. They want this to be the thing, because when the courts see this, the courts see, oh, we'll put all these guys in behaviour changing. More money in their pocket. Men who are genuinely victims of violence of female partners and family members might be assisted by the Men's Referral Service. No. Feminist. Just stay away. Victims of Crime Helpline. Ugh. Look, I know somebody who tried to deal with victims of crime, a male victim, and it's not worth the effort. They'll fucking jump over themselves to see that women get assistance. You will be given the forms and told to fill them in and return them, and they don't make it at all easy for you. There are payments for being a victim of crime. You can get $50,000 for being a victim of a crime that was investigated by the police. That's all it takes. And you get a payout from the government for being a victim who reports it. But you've got to fill out the forms. And like I said, the women's services will jump over themselves to see that these forms are filled out and help you with them. There are no services for men to help them fill out those forms. None at fucking all. The Victims Assistance Counselling Program. Look, I just wouldn't go near any of these things. And when they're recommended by what? Where were they? Oh, fucking, they were up there. Who cares? By the feminists, stay the fuck away. Fully, just avoid plague. Oh, just took that one out of there. Righto. Last page, shall we? I'm moving away from men, because if I read the rest of that men's section, I'm just going to fucking go through the roof. It really was fucking horrendous. I worked so hard to read through that. How the fuck this stays in our legal code, I do not know. How this stays as advice by the Judicial College of Victoria, I do not fucking know. 591, Prevalence of Family Violence in Same-Sex Relationships. To date, there is little accurate Australian research that records the level of family violence in same-sex relationships. However, there are a number of overseas studies that suggest that the general patterns and levels of family violence in same-sex relationships are about the same as in heterosexual relationships. Technically correct. However, lesbians are more abusive in those overseas studies, and gay men are less abusive. And when you average that across the entire group of same-sex relationships, you end up with it being about the same as heterosexual relationships. Which probably tells you how violent women can be, right? That lesbians, same-sex female relationships, in overseas studies, which they've cited, which they've given us no citations for particularly, a couple of vague ones here, but you know, again, they're general. But overseas studies was cited here, and I know there are overseas studies that show that lesbians are far more aggressive in their relationships. And I'm telling you now, any guy who's been in enough relationships know how many abusive women there are out there by the terms of this document. Remember, nagging wife jokes? That, according to this document, nagging to the point of distraction, to the point of destroying you morally, is abuse. To date, there is little accurate Australian research that records the level of family violence. I read that, and it's bullshit anyway. A Victorian study reported on the response of 390 gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex LGBTI Victorians on an online survey their experiences of same-sex partner abuse, and found that same-sex transgender, is that like transgender on transgender? I want to know. And intersex on intersex? Yeah, I don't know. I've got questions already. Oh, for fuck's sake. In order for these two to have reported here, they have to be transgender on transgender or intersex on intersex, or they are referring back to their actual real biological gender. Just under 1/3 of LBGT respondents, because I'm not going for I, that's just fucking bullshit. It's such a small part of the population who are genuinely intersex that it's ridiculous. And they, look, I'm not going there. Respondents have been in a same-sex relationship. 1/3 were abused by their partner. Of respondents subjects to abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, lesbian women were more likely than gay men to report having been in an abusive same-sex relationship. They have very carefully fitted in the word report there, but there is evidence to show that lesbian women are simply more violent, and the gay men in relationships are not. American studies indicate between 22 and 46% of lesbian women reported having been physically violent in intimate partnerships. Other studies estimate 15 to 20% of gay men and lesbian women have been affected. Right, again, we've bunched them together, so we can ignore that one if we want to actually get a useful figure from it. Because 22 to 46% of lesbians, and when you add gay men, it comes down to 15 to 20. You work it out. While most of the research based was self-selected samples, it suggests that family violence in same-sex relationships is a major issue. Yes, it is in lesbian ones. Yes. It's the same as we know that date rape drugs are mainly a gay male issue. That's where the majority of date rape drugs are being used amongst single gay men. Amongst gay men. I won't single out the single ones. Look, there's not that many men in relationships with one another. Lesbians love relationships with one another. In any case, yes, there are problems and we need to deal with them, but there's not much information here, is there? And it's not as victim blamey as the men one, is it? All right, I'm going to leave this. I really recommend that people take a look at these documents, especially Victorians, especially Victorian men or MRA women for that matter, or anyone interested in the welfare of men in Victoria, because this is how the Judicial College of Victoria is advising the courts to act. And as you can see, I mean, the bias towards women was pretty obvious throughout. But the section on men stood out and just showed how biased. The fact that they even asked, the organisation that they asked, which focuses its efforts on male perpetrated domestic violence against women only. They're not so worried about children. Their focus is men on women. They've been known to fudge figures and put out weird ass deviations from the truth, I'll call them that. But the fact that they even asked that organisation to give them that section on men, it's got to make you wonder. It's got to make you wonder how our courts are dealing with men. And not just the family violence, but full stop. Because if it's in family violence in that way, how hard does it rock through the rest of the legal code? Anyway, I'm going to call it quits. This is my third one in 3 days. I've got a 4-year-old trying to get my attention. He's rummaging around. He's already stopped me recording twice. I've had to start again. May your gods remain fictional, and I will see you in the next one.